So, for our last speaker for the day, a good friend of C, you know, one of the companies that was a founding member of C, and one of the gentlemen that's been very steadfast in supporting C all along, Frank Thompson. He's Group Vice President for Supply Chain, Parker Aerospace. Frank, thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Michael. Yeah. Is that my clicker?
That's your clicker.
Perfect. Thank you. It's become somewhat of a tradition, but I'm always in awe of the speakers before me. So before I get started, I want to go a little off script and kind of acknowledge some of the things that I thought were particularly important. And I'll kind of go to one that came up there at the end. We talked about sense of urgency. My concern is that much beyond this audience, we haven't really created the broad sense of urgency of what's coming. You know, we talked a little bit yesterday about all this stuff that's coming. We didn't even talk about F-35 yesterday, but we talked about all the platforms that are ramping up. There has never been a military program that's building one of something a day. Well, outside of munitions, obviously. So that's another big one that's coming. And that's why I applaud the audience for actually getting engaged early in this, because, and the theme of today, it is about leadership. It's all about leadership. And a lot of the stuff, I was going to say, is Kenny still here? You know, APQP. How many people before today have heard of APQP? That's actually pretty good, but I would suspect the rest of the audience is not really ready to that. And I'll talk for us, for example, when we get into this, we literally have tens of thousands of new parts that are in development today that's going to come out to the supply chain. How well are we going to do that in the middle of the ramp-ups on 737 and A320 and getting ready for F-35? I'm worried. But anyway, as we kind of continue on this, the other one I thought was really interesting. I think there's another phenomenon that's happening in our businesses today, and I talked about a little bit earlier about the younger generation that's coming in. Who has kind of a bimodal distribution of people? A lot of people in their 40s and 50s and a lot of people in their 20s. That's most of what our businesses are today. And I'll tell you what, if we don't figure out from a leadership perspective of how to effectively lead those 20-something-year-olds, because most of their first-line leaderships are 40-something-year-olds. And remember when we were in our 20s and we said everybody over 40 didn't have a clue what was going on? We're those people we used to talk about. And we've really got to make sure from a first-line leadership that we're getting our people prepared for actually getting engaged and helping to run our businesses. And so in the context of all this, the other thing I thought was really interesting, and I'll get to that in a moment, Mike, is that really what's the objective of this? When we think about our customers, it's not the Boeings or the Airbuses or the F-35s. They've got customers. And in a lot of cases on the commercial side, it's us. And is what are we willing to pay for a flight on that aircraft that drives all this stuff coming down through the rest of it? I get invited, and it's actually, I'm excited about this, I get invited a lot to our customers now. Usually it's all the marketing guys, but I get to go there. And I'll tell you what, the two things they are most interested from a supply chain of what we're doing for them is what are we doing to control cost from affordability, and what are we doing to mitigate risk? Because they see that, and I'll speak for us sitting in the middle, 85% of our cost of sales is stuff we purchase. What is it for the airframers? Most of what they do are things they're buying. So when you really look at most of us that are customers way upstream, it's about putting the stuff together. It's the labor of the direct assembly. Most of the stuff that we're talking about is purchased. The other thing I always find is an interesting comment. When we talked about, particularly when I'll speak of Boeing, for example, they'll say, we've reduced our supply base to X. Well, the reason they've done that is they've created bigger packages. And if you look at the extended supply chain, those 4,000 suppliers are still in the supply chain. They're just being managed one tier down. So collectively, we got to work at how do we aggregate and pull all that stuff together. So with that being said, really, you know, kind of the objective of mine is, from a strategic planning perspective, is that it's really the most cost-effective and efficient supply chain that wins. And it's got to start from the customer all the way through us. And it's how do we help collectively connect the dots is what's going to help all of us win. So, all right, back on track. Parker Aerospace, we sit in the middle of a lot of our customers. It was interesting, and there'll be a slide to kind of talk about some of the stuff that Mike was speaking to on F-35. But our principal products are in flight control systems, hydraulic systems, fuel and inerting systems, engine systems, and conveyance system. And conveyance is actually the plumbing that connects a lot of these systems together. Just shy of $2 billion last year, so we'll be exceeding that number this year. About 6,000 people. We have 8 divisions and 43 worldwide locations. A lot of our worldwide locations are actually supporting our aftermarket. We have actually 8 manufacturing facilities. So here's where our products fit. They fit out there in the flight controls, so actuation, servo controls, trim actuation. On the fuel, we'll talk engine systems. And this is where primarily both on Rolls-Royce, GE, and UTC. Fuel nozzles is a big portion of our business, and pneumatic valves that sit out there. Fuel conveyance we talked about. That's our Strataflex facility that actually does a lot of the plumbing that pulls a lot of these systems together. Hydraulics, and then finally on the fuel systems. So that's our product lines. Our market segments. And why engines make up 23% of our sales, even though it's a small portion of what we do at the OEM level. Engines are pretty hostile environments, so there's a lot of aftermarket that comes there. But if you look at the OEM portion of our sales, most of that's probably coming in the commercial transports and military fixed wing. So this is what we're talking about, and this is probably over the last 4 years, $20 billion of new business wins. And this sits out over the life of the programs. So that's on, I think the next one, I'll talk about that. High-value solutions, and then strongly positioned in global markets. So this is where it's at. This is all the platforms that we've talked about out there. So whichever way we look, there's on the flight control side, we're on the new Bombardier C-Series. We're in Embraer, Gulfstream, Cessna, Comac, the new C919. On the hydraulic side, also Boeing, Airbus, Embraer. So all of this, and most of these are all new platforms across the board. That's the new A350, it's the new A380, and in some cases we now have the A320neo that's coming, as well as the 737 MAX that's going to be coming out that has a new bill of material on it as well. So this was actually, of the 20 billion, our new business is no longer selling components, it's selling systems. So only about 2 billion of that has actually been at the component level. The balance of that has been at the systems level. These are the platforms we talked about: 350, 919, Bombardier, the Trent 1000 engine, the XWB as well as the 1000, the Gulfstream 650, and the Embraer Legacy programs. You saw a similar slide this morning that Doug kind of spoke to, but this is where we see the business going out there. This is new. So this is new platforms. This isn't 737, this isn't A320, this is 787, A350, C-Series, and 919. That's all coming over, and all of this is in development. This is all new hardware. This is not in production today. Keeping our engineers pretty busy. So this is another one that similarly went into that. A 2% CAGR, 7% forecasted going out of what's going to be happening out there on new platforms. This is a lot of new business. This is a great place to be collectively if we're ready for it. Then this is what we talked about, the re-engineering on the 737 MAX and the A320. And these are some of the opportunities we see out there. Again, flight controls, hydraulic systems, fuel and inerting, and the fluid conveyance and engine systems once again. So this is beyond the $20 billion that we see out there. And to be quite honest, we're actually kind of glad that we're getting a chance to catch our breath, because we don't really have the engineering resources to do everything that we currently have on our own plate. And as part of this, it all gets back into lean. How are we doing things more effectively? Some of this is coming as because we're defining what's core to us and what are we taking outside in our businesses as well. We just recently are having one division that's actually outsourcing their tool crib. So all the resources that go with that is another one. In most cases, we've done things, as we talked about, certainly patent error is a big one for us on all the standard hardware across the company. But we're trying to package that stuff together where we can kind of reduce that to really drive our people on the engineering side, the supply chain side, and on the assembly side. Very little is the rest of that we consider to be core to our business. Capital expenditures, this is also good and bad. We talked about this yesterday. Certainly you can ride this down in a down cycle, but all of us collectively have to be looking at when are we making sure that we're doing the appropriate capital investments to get ready for this new cycle that's coming as well here. So let's talk a little bit about supplier development. This is the Parker Win strategy that talks from the very top. So there's a couple of things that sits in the middle of this. From financial performance, the corporation sees how we manage our supply chain as a big core competency relative to our ability to be profitable. And then if you look at this on a customer service, we can't support our customers with quality product if we can't do it effectively through our supply chain at the same time. This is how then we've taken that and put that into supply chain. Some of you may have seen some of this before. I've kind of shared this stuff. I'll go to Mario's point is this is my story and I'm sticking to it because there's not a lot of new stuff here. I think it gets back into it's not about the plan. It's about the execution. So on the execution side of this stuff, there's 2 points that I wanted to kind of focus on. There's this regional bias that we have here in the coordinated international participation. So certainly we participate and support BAE, Lockheed on the F-35, and it's not easy, I'm telling you, and more of our customers today, on the commercial side as well, are looking for us to put content. Boeing on the C-17 is looking, well, India, let's start with India. India is buying C-17s. India wants work content there. Most of that C-17 is purchased from their suppliers. So Boeing is saying we have to have a presence there for 10 aircraft. So how do we then work with the balance of our bill of material to help them meet some of their obligations that they have there as well? So certainly this low-cost sourcing or best cost sourcing that we talk to it is that certainly one area of how we're addressing the 2 things that come from our customers is most important. What are we doing to manage cost? What are we doing to mitigate risk? So I'm going to concentrate most of this on the risk mitigation portion of this stuff. Kind of busy here, but what we're looking at is supplier management kind of drives across the organization. We spend a lot of time on putting lean resources inside our facilities and leaning up our operations. And the thing that I've kind of always argued is 80% of our value stream is out with our suppliers, not things we do inside our 4 doors. So we're trying to shift our resources to be able to get more lean resources internally, as well as our supplier quality engineer resources, as well as our supply chain development people to work together collectively as a team on our risk priorities to help suppliers get better. So that's the balance of what I want to kind of talk to. I've shared this before, and actually, interestingly, one of the guys that worked for me shared this at a customer's perspective, and one of our competitors said, "Where did you get that slide? You stole that from me. I created that at Ford." And I was like, "Well, oh, so you created the 2x2." So really, this gets back into some of the stuff that we were talking about before, is that all of our suppliers, and I'll show you a little bit of a slide coming up, we're putting every supplier, and we're trying to do this actually annually. We should probably be doing it more dynamically, more regularly, and we're going to try to continue to automate that. In this 2x2, and we talked about it yesterday. There's really 2 dimensions. How are you performing, and do you have the right stuff? And the right stuff is stuff like what we're doing here today. Because some suppliers perform incredibly well, but they don't have the right stuff, there's no motivation to pull that business away from them and take it someplace else because you know what? We got bigger fish to fry. Well, we got to really concentrate on those that are not performing today. At some point in time, we got to reconcile that group. Because that group there at the bottom that sustain, evaluate either has to move up or out. Because longer term, they're not going to be able to support what we need in our business going forward. So that's probably our second priority to help these guys get better. But the first priority is working on the guys that have the right stuff that we think are the right people that we want to continue to partner with. But for whatever reason, we're not achieving the degree of performance that we need. Busy slide, so I won't spend a lot of time on each of these elements, but we talked about the risk priorities and the different elements of looking at this. So it's not just about performance. We're looking at quality risk, we're looking at lean risk, we're looking at suppliers' abilities to effectively manage their next level supply chain and stuff as well. How well are you managing your suppliers? And this is actually a journey, because when you first start this journey, and I'll tell you, we do it with our customers. When a customer comes in to do an audit for us, our first priority is get them out the door with no actions, right? And I think the thing that we miss is they're really genuinely here to try to help us get better. And if we just take a moment and, look at this stuff and reflect on it honestly about how we're going to get better, that's what we're trying to do here, to help people to expose what those things are and collectively work together on improvements. This is also, I don't know if you can read it, but we talked about this yesterday, Doug. This is one of the things when we look at from the dimensions. We've been actually playing with this for 2 years on an Excel file. This was finally released by our corporation as an enterprise-wide. This is across Parker Hannifin, not across Parker Aerospace, but across Parker Hannifin, every supplier daily. So every supplier daily can look in here on our portal and look at yesterday's deliveries. I dropped off something yesterday, did you receive it? So on a daily basis, quality and delivery performance that you can have. As well out on there is this process of continuous improvement element. So that's one that we got to continue to work on and communicate. But what this attempts to do is to get a weighted risk score, okay, by each of the suppliers. So it takes together your quality and delivery performance that you've got. Are you a sole source provider for us? What's been your pricing strategy? Are your prices continue to go up independent of what's happening in the marketplace? So each of these, we kind of hit the weighting on this, because as we sit with everybody individually, we'll kind of talk about the weighting of each of these elements. We also look at, do we have a long-term agreement with you? And do you have supplier plan? Is that right? Oh, supplier plan. That's the one thing we talked about. Where you sit in the 2x2 quadrant. Okay? And so there's a score that comes out in each one of these. And what this helps us to do is that we've talked about this. Across the aerospace group, we have about 2,000 suppliers. And in the 80-20 of this, about 400 suppliers represent about 85% of our spend. But whether you talk about the 400 or you talk about the 2,000, we don't have enough resources to constantly look at that. So what we have to have is a way to say, what percolates to the top? What are the predictive, not just historic, metrics that are saying where do we need to spend our time and to go fix problems before they become problems? One of the things that we also created, and actually this was kind of slick, this is a Google Maps, but what we've done is we've actually tied this into our AP system so we can look at where we're paying, so we can quickly assess, and this was an output of the Japan quake when everybody says, hey, what happened to your suppliers there? How many you got there? Oh, and so everybody's scrambling. Now, immediately, daily, we can look at if anything happens in any country or any city, we can look at what's our exposure. What suppliers do we have there? We can start making some phone calls to look at this. The downside of this is that we don't get to see your suppliers. And it's one of the things that we have a customer that came to us and said, can you give us a list of all your suppliers and their suppliers? I can give that to you, but I'll tell you what, a month from now it's going to be different. You need something pretty dynamic to tell you what is going. And we had some people that were afraid of that. Well, that's our IP. We can't tell everybody who's our suppliers and stuff as well and stuff. And really, we gave it to them, and part of it was because I had to get engaged. Our front end of our business says, no, we're not going to tell you our supplier relationships. If we got a problem, we'll work together with you. And I go, their intentions are good. What they're trying to do is to quickly assess what's going to happen and how we're going to collectively work across the extended supply chain. Because this is what it's all about, right? It's about the extended supply chain. It isn't just about our ability to manage our suppliers. Kind of a phased approach to how we're looking at of each of these stuff. So we're doing some assessments and going out and looking at the risk priorities, doing this by division perspective. And again, we're still kind of new to this too. So we're still in the process of training and developing people to kind of go after this and work together constructively with this. And the boxes are on there because in case a supplier happened to be on there, we didn't want to acknowledge you as being an exceptional supplier amongst other peers and stuff. Exactly. But this is another one. This is the thing we talked about, and this is a different way of looking at the point that Doug made yesterday in the panel, is I'm 100% quality, I'm 100% delivery, however, I'm 60% overall because I have no PCI. And what we call the PCI is the process of continuous improvement. And what we're looking for collectively is how are we both working on ideas to take cost out of the process. So we rate you on two things, is your idea generation and then our ability to be able to implement. Because some of the stuff, we know when you lock in a process, and this is the frustration we have sometimes with our customers, is that everybody wants to lock down processes, right? Because you can control it and you can reduce the variability of risk if you lock it down. But if you lock stuff down, how do you ever take cost out? If you never change it, and that includes moving a piece of equipment. If you move a piece of equipment, well, you can't actually do that without us getting involved and our customers getting involved because that's a process change. So it's all of these little things that we want to collectively work on to make sure that we get through that. And this is the reason we're all here, because we live in a pretty good community. These are all the airlines, all the customers that we have, and it's all about our success that's going to make us all successful in the process. So with that, thank you. I'll entertain any questions if there are any. I'm kind of surprised.
I'm sorry, I'm just not letting it go. One of your last points is really, I think, an important one, and everybody needed to hear that. I just want to say it again because we deal with it. We're first tier to Boeing on the 737 line. Lean is phenomenal. Six Sigma is great. Everything that we're doing on continuous improvement that we're training our people to do and we're empowering, you can't do once a part is qualified on a plane without notifying your customers what you're doing. For the lower you are on the food chain, the harder that gets. But it's a fascinating piece of this business. And I'm glad you said it out loud because it's one of those things. When Boeing came back to us and said, how are you doing with your lean program? We're doing really well. Have you notified us about it? Because they walked through and they said, my God, this facility doesn't look anything like it did a year ago. Did we know you did this?
Yeah.
You knew we were doing lean because you told us to do it. And so we've developed a very close relationship with a group of manufacturing engineering people at Boeing that are monitoring what we're doing. And we're trying to make sure that we do that with all of our customers, but it's huge.
Well, we had one, and why it's important, because it hit us pretty hard. We had an escape to a customer because a supplier changed a manufacturing process from a grind to a machine because they got a new piece of equipment. I can take cost out, I can do it more cost effectively. The problem is when you plate that new surface, the plating doesn't do what it used to do under a grind operation. And you start getting flakes off the chrome in the customer's aircraft while it's fielded. And then you get something back from the field and you chase the stuff back and you said, somebody changed a process and didn't tell you. What do you mean somebody changed a process and didn't tell you? So it's kind of important. Okay. I think we're good. Thank you much.
Appreciated your comments, Frank, especially your impromptu comments. And I have a couple of things to offer before we go on. I really appreciate your looking at the conference and spending the time and then giving us your feedback and your impromptu comments as well as your presentation, so thanks. A couple of things to offer. Your comment about the sense of urgency. We see that out there too, and when we get guests and visitors, it's kind of a splash of cold water. to hear the sense of urgency that this group has about scaling up our rate of improvement. And, our rate of lean adoption, our rate of improvement. We can't necessarily fix things like, materials lead time, which was, Michael spoke about, and those kind of things, without some collaboration, but we can certainly focus on those things that we can improve. Our processes and reliability and maturity of our processes and the amount of labor that goes into things and how many parts we have to scrap before we get it right and all those kind of things. But what I would say is, you've seen the kind of message this group delivers. This group has a high sense of urgency, and there's a lot of CEOs in C here today and who aren't here today who can deliver a high sense of urgency to other suppliers. And you've got about 50% of your suppliers that may not get that sense of urgency, or whatever the percentage is. So if you'd like to bring them, and Michael, I extend this to you too, if you'd like to bring them into our conferences, we'll guarantee that we'll communicate that sense of urgency in a way they can understand. If there's one thing that I believe, it's this group gets it. And when a CEO from a supplier company is speaking to another CEO of a supplier company and saying, here's why I think this is highly urgent, we need to work together on this plan, I think it has a lot of impact. Not that you shouldn't listen to your customers, but you have to remember that there's been 4 or 5 generations of customers speaking to them before about this, and they pretty much come to expect you to say that, whereas a group of CEOs who are CEOs and owners of very successful companies telling you that, has a different ring to it. So I can guarantee you that if you bring bring a couple hundred suppliers into one of these conferences, we will deliver that message effectively. And I think that would be very helpful to you for some segment of your supply chains. The second thing I would do, and it's just a rhetorical question, is I would say, why in the heck should you be paying for any part of their improvement? Why in the heck should you be hiring people and paying for things or spending time for their improvement? And I know the answer is because, they won't do it if we don't, type of thing. We have to make sure that there's pressure. But why wouldn't they, as this audience, why wouldn't they be spending their own money, creating their own visibility, and financing their own system for improving, especially if they're on the bottom 50% of your supply base? Why wouldn't they be paying for that? It's just a rhetorical question, but it's one that I ask you to take back with you. Because here's a group that's financing their own weight and accelerating their own performance, and they get it. And we're very happy to talk to others about that. So, again, we thank you for your presentations because you've done an excellent job of helping us to fuel our sense of urgency and see what we have to do in order to keep with the pace. So it's always great to have our customers come in and help us to see that. Okay, a few more words as we're just kind of winding up here.